And the lighting here is brutal. I need my office.
Kyle, let me know when you can get my video going.
Your video should work here. Let me just check.
The host has stopped it.
Okay. There you go. All right, everyone, let's get started. Everyone's been waiting patiently. So yeah, I'm really excited today. This is the first webinar actually that we have a guest speaker on. So I'll be talking today about how to finance your renovations, and we're going to probably have about half of the segment today circling around some insider tips from an appraiser. And so I'm really excited to talk about that. So welcome to the presentation. Just a quick table of contents here. We will be introducing Adam from Adlaw Appraisals. We'll be talking about what an appraisal is, the three types of appraisals, some appraisal tips, how to fund your renovations, and the different types of ways to fund your renos, which is using cash or unsecured debt, something called Purchase Plus Improvements, which is a really cool program. I really like that one. Refinancing before or after you do your renovations, and then also talking about construction. One of my previous webinars about I guess a month or two ago was on construction, so I'm not going to go too much in depth on that one, but I just want to give you a highlight of why you might use a construction loan to fund your renovations. So without ado, I'd like to welcome this handsome gentleman to the front here. For those of you who don't know Adam Lawrenson, how long have we known each other for, Adam? Quite a while now.
Since 2010.
Yeah, it's been quite a while, over a decade. That's crazy. Somehow this guy keeps getting younger and younger every time I see him. But yeah, Adam and I have been working together for over a decade, and Adam's been our preferred appraiser ever since we met. So we use him anytime we are able to use Adam for an appraisal. We do. Different lenders have different requirements and different approved appraiser lists and different methods of picking appraiser. Sometimes we can pick our appraiser, sometimes we can't. But anytime we have a chance to pick Adam, we do. Adam, maybe you can just quickly tell us a little bit about your business and about Adlaw.
Sure, thanks, Kyle, and thank you so much for having me. Welcome, everyone. My name is Adam with Adlaw Appraisals. I started in the appraisal business in 2007, working for BC Assessment. I grew up in the appraisal industry, so it's in my blood, and started Adlaw Appraisals in 2013. Since then, we've been doing lots of work, primarily for mortgage brokers and for all the major lenders. So Scotia, TD, RBC, you name it, we are on their approved lists, and we do about 1,000 appraisals a month. And Kyle's been one of our most consistent clients over the last 8 years, and we really appreciate our relationship with him. And I love what he does. It's all about education. And I know it usually comes back and helps him out with more clients and more business, but he really does an exceptional job with educating his clients, especially with investment properties and those who want to get a good ROI on their investment. So really excited to chat today. Yeah,
for sure. Awesome. Well, maybe you can start us off and just tell us what is an appraisal, Adam?
Well, an appraisal is a point in time valuation of a property. So it's a exact valuation as of a given date, and an appraisal can vary. I always say, yes, 10 appraisers, the value of a property, you're going to get 10 different values. So that's the short and sweet of it.
Yeah, awesome. One of the things I wanted to ask you too is what the three types of appraisals are. And so I have just a little bit of information about each from our perspective, but maybe you can go into a little bit more detail about the differences between what a full appraisal is, a drive-by, and an auto valuation.
Yeah, sure. So the standard appraisal is a full appraisal. And what that means is you're going to have somebody visit your property, inspect the inside and the outside of the home, do a site analysis, taking into account all features of that property, and create a very well-written, thorough appraisal that describes your property in great detail and gives you an exact valuation. That's a full appraisal. That's kind of the main appraisal that we do. The other options are a drive-by and desktop appraisal. So if the lender decides to do a drive-by or desktop, it's usually as a result of a low loan to value situation, and it provides a 10% range of value. Desktop appraisal, it's all done from the appraiser's desk, It uses online data and it provides a 10% range of value. The drive-by appraisal is just a step up from a desktop appraisal, and it also provides a 10% range of value, but the appraiser actually, sorry, I got cut off there, Kyle. The appraiser actually drives by the property and does a quick exterior inspection, literally from their car. So they'll drive by, take a picture, and do the rest of the work at the office. And that's just to give the lender peace of mind that the property actually still exists, because sometimes properties are knocked down, they're burnt down, etc. A lender doesn't want to lend money on a 30-year AM for a property that does not exist. So those are the two 10% range appraisals that we do, the drive-by and the desktop. And the last one is an auto valuation. And this is usually done with information that is gathered by BC Assessment, Land Corps, these big corporations that gather data on properties. And they can actually spit out a pretty rough ballpark value of a property. Sometimes they're bang on, sometimes they're way off. But at the end of the day, it's whatever the lender feels they want in order to protect their asset that they're lending against.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, what is an acceptable range? You mentioned this on a drive-by or desktop. What's an acceptable range for a full appraisal?
So a full appraisal has one value. So there literally is no range in that appraisal. That being said, like I referred to earlier, if you do have 5 or 10 different appraisers, they could come up with a different range of value. And it depends on the unique qualities of the property. So if it's a very unique property and there's no good comparable sales, I mean, I've seen properties range from 1.5 million to 2.2 million on an appraisal for the same property. It depends on the appraiser's knowledge of the area, the comparables they use, and the approach that they take to that valuation. So there shouldn't be that large of a range, but you could expect, if you're ordering a couple of appraisals on one property, maybe up to a 10% range from 2 different appraisers.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, from a financing perspective, full appraisals are almost always needed for rental properties, and a lot of the time in smaller markets with less sales data. I think that as you go down the list here and go into drive-by and auto valuation, in general, the lenders are able to use a less accurate valuation method when they feel more certain about their risk level and the level of risk that they're taking. So you mentioned a low loan to value is often used in a drive-by or desktop. So if you're only financing 50% of the value, well, even if the value comes in a range, they have enough of a comfort there that they're comfortable with it, right?
Exactly. And one more point on the drive-by desktop appraisal: if you buy a property for $1 million and the appraiser believes the house is worth about $1 million, that range could be $900,000 to $1 million. And the lender will lend on the lower end of the range. So I always advise brokers, if they think there's going to be a possible issue with value, to always order a full appraisal. Even if the lender requests a desktop, you don't want to leave any room for any issues. So full appraisals are always the way to go if there's going to be a issue with value. Makes
sense. Yeah. On the auto valuation, so this is kind of interesting, and you've probably noticed this too, Adam. It's been a big trend over the last, CMHC and the insurers have been using it for years and years, but it seems like banks are starting to use this a little bit more frequently than they have in the past. But insurers use an auto valuation on every single file. So they first try the auto valuation. If that fails, then they go ahead and call a guy like Adam to do a full appraisal. And in general, I find that they usually will need a full appraisal in these situations when there's not a lot of sales data. Is that a pretty fair assessment, Adam? If it's a unique property and there's not a lot of sales for that type of property, is that usually when it would fail?
We don't know the decision process that the lenders make, but that would be a good assumption. Yeah. Yeah. If they're not confident in the value, there's not a lot of sales, they want someone to go in and give them an exact value, then we come in.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah, so I think a lot of the auto valuation, I think it's taking a ton of macro data and it's picking through. And if they have enough macro data, then they can figure out a kind of a zone. And yeah, you're right that it's not only just a lack of data, but also the data might be saying, hey, you know what, it doesn't seem like it's coming in a value. And then that's where they want another person to actually take a look at the physical property to say, oh, there's a ton of renovations on this house. That's why this is priced at this point. It's really high end materials, where all the other comps that were pulled from the macro data were, average at best, right? So makes sense.
You got it.
Cool. Another thing on the financing part is the auto valuations are often usually just for owner occupied only. It's again, usually for rental properties. The lenders are usually still wanting to see that a full appraisal is done. That's because on a rental property, again, everything they look at risk tolerance from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other. In general, a rental property is considered a higher risk loan than a owner occupied loan, and so they want to see what exactly what asset they're lending on, because they want to be a little bit more certain that they're lending on a good property. I'm going to go through it because I have a whole bunch of things that I'd like to ask you, Adam, and get some feedback from you. So we hear this all the time. You know, what are some things that somebody should do when they're going to get an appraisal? People always ask me, "Oh, should I run around and completely make a spotless clean of my house, or like what are some of the things that they need to do? If you're a hoarder, should I like get rid of the stuff in my house, or what should I do?" So, what are some of the tips that from an appraisal perspective you would recommend somebody does, a homeowner does, before they have an appraisal for a refinance?
Yeah, and we get that same question asked all the time, Kyle. Like, what do I need to do? I've never had an appraisal done before. Cleaning the house, making it showcase ready is not necessarily imperative, but I would suggest have your house as tidy if you were to have your mother and father-in-law over for dinner. Get the clothes in the hamper, get the countertops wiped down. The appraiser just wants to see what's there. And if there's stuff all over the floor, we can't see the flooring, we can't see the walls because there's boxes piled up. It does impact our ability to see what's there. And we take photos of every room. So if we take a photo of a room and it's a complete disaster, and the lender's maybe making a character decision or a subjective decision on this file, they'll say, you know what, this person doesn't take care of their home. They might not take care of their mortgage payment. So we just want to make sure the house looks as good as possible, but it doesn't need to look perfect. It can look just, nice, clean and tidy is just fine. That's what I'd say. So if you're having company over, it should look kind of like that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's a subjective thing too. I know everyone lives differently. And I know it's funny. Sometimes I go into a house and someone will say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for the mess." But it's like pristine. And then you'll have someone else says, "Come on in, welcome to my home. Everything's perfect." And it's a complete disaster. So, just have it as clean as to the best of your ability.
The first example of it being spotless clean and like, "Oh, I'm so sorry for the mess," sounds like my mother-in-law. Everybody has a different threshold for what's messy and what's not, right?
Exactly. So that would be one thing. Keep your house clean. Write a list of updates of your property. So anything that you've done over the years, write it down on a piece of paper, and every single thing. If you've painted a room, if you've updated flooring, if you've done electrical, plumbing, drain tile, the roof was done 10 years ago. Anything you can think of that you've improved on to your property, write that out to the appraiser, because the appraiser is going to be there for 10, 15, 20 minutes tops. If you're trying to tell him every single thing you've done, he might not do the best job he can as far as getting you the maximum value or the fairest value possible. So have a list of improvements to give to the appraiser, and let them know your value expectations as well. So that's the third thing. Again, there's always that range of value, because what Kyle's going to pay for a property might be a little bit different than what I would pay for a property. So there's always going to be a range of value, especially with the variation of appraiser skills, competency, etc. So, if you're looking for 1.5 million, let the appraiser know that, because if they're doing their analysis and they see it ranges from 1.475 to 1.5 or 1.55, they might be able to just hit that 1.5 mark. It's reasonable. It makes sense, as opposed to, putting it to the more conservative side and having the deal go sideways.
Yeah, makes sense.
Kyle, you do a great job of giving us those expectations. So this is for just a general knowledge for someone that might be doing an appraisal elsewhere.
Yeah. Awesome. That's good. Cool. Let's go to the next question I had for you. 1 second here. I want to talk a little bit about some of the mistakes that appraisers make. I mean, I'm sure that you see other appraisers work all the time. You say, because I've done that before, where somebody else had an appraisal done already, and I look at them like, I don't know if this is reasonable, or is that too high? Is that too low? I'm sure you see a lot of other people's work. So what are some of the mistakes that you see other appraisers are doing on their reports?
Sorry, Kyle, can you see me okay?
You went blank all of a sudden.
Okay. No problems. I'll just try to figure it out here. Yeah. So 3 mistakes that appraisers make. I'm going to add a 4th one here too. So the first one is they don't look at active listings. Mm-hmm. So we use what's called a direct comparison approach, where we pick 3 or 4 comparable sales. Often that will tell one side of the story, the demand side of the equation. The other side is supply. So if there's no supply of housing in, say, Abbotsford, Maple Ridge, or a certain area of Vancouver, people will be paying above market price or above the list price for a property. And we want to make sure that we can explain that to the reader by saying, hey, there's a lack of supply and there's a lot of demands. That'll actually help us push the value to where we need it to get to. Some appraisers don't look at that. So they'll look at the 3 comps, maybe from 3 months ago, that point to one value, but in today's market, it's a totally different value. And sometimes they can't catch that value if they're not looking at the supply part of the equation. So not looking at listings and not looking at trends. So we keep a very close eye on what's happening in each market. We have statistics, we have our own in-house files that we can rely on. And if the market's going up 2 or 3% per month, the appraiser has to consider that. They can't just look back at what was the value 3 or 4 weeks ago or 2 or 3 months ago. They have to know what's happening today, and understanding the trends is super important. And then just not knowing the market, or they're not experienced enough. So an appraisal company like mine, we have 12 appraisers. We have appraisers that are experts in each area that they appraise. Often an appraiser will go out on their own and start doing appraisals on their own, and they'll take business from anywhere they can. So they might live in Abbotsford. If they get an appraisal in downtown Vancouver, they'll take it because they want to, make a living and take that work, but they're really not competent in that market, and it can lead to issues as well. So things that I would recommend: ask your appraiser when they show up, hey, have you appraised in this area before? Do you know what's happening? How long have you been appraising? Things like that can get a good idea. And if you're not comfortable with that appraiser, let your lender or your mortgage broker know that, hey, the man or woman that came by yesterday, they'd only been appraising for 6 months. They didn't even know that we lived in, this catchment with this school district, et cetera. And you want to have peace of mind that you are getting the fairest, and oftentimes with a investment property, you're getting the maximum value. And you want to have an appraiser that knows that market, especially in an increasing market like we have today. Those are the 3 top mistakes I think appraisers make.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Something that I've been seeing a lot of probably the last 16, 17 months or so has been time adjustments. So if we see an appraisal and you're using comparables that sold in August or September, a lot of the time you're going to see that you'll actually see a time adjustment pushing the price of the property that you're appraising upwards, based on the fact that these properties that you're comparing against sold a few months ago. And if the market is going up, then you need to factor in that time adjustment. So I'm seeing that quite a bit. Okay, cool. For your, I'm interested to see why your video wasn't working there, Adam. Have you tried turning it off and putting it back on again? I guess tech tips 101, right?
That's what I've been doing this whole time. Yeah, nothing seems to be working here. So
okay, no worries.
Bear with me.
Yeah, okay, no worries. Maybe while we're working on that, what are lenders looking for on an appraisal? What are some of the things that you find you often have to make sure that you're addressing? Like, what are the banks sometimes calling you about or asking you questions about?
Well, number one, Kyle, is the value, right? They will actually the underwriters almost do a mini appraisal on our appraisal. They want to make sure that the comparables reviews are in the area, that they're recent, that the adjustments for those comparables. I don't know if everyone has had a chance to look at an appraisal, but each comparable that we use is adjusted for any differences. So if those adjustments become super high, the underwriters kind of get wary or get a little bit nervous, and they'll send us an email saying, why are these adjustments so high? And we have a really good explanation for that when there is a lack of sales. So value is number one. The remaining economic life of a property is also crucial. So every property has a given lifespan. Typically it's 65 years. And as the property ages, that remaining economic life shrinks. Things that people do to increase economic life are updates, renovations, keeping your home well maintained. But if there's less than, say, 35 years remaining economic life on a home, that will often kill a deal, because I'm sure a lot of your clients are looking for kind of maximum values, and the best deal possible. And if the remaining economic life, and you want that 30-year amortization, if we tell the bank that there's only 15 or 20 years left on that property, that will shrink your amortization down to 10 or 15 years, and that balloons the mortgage payment. So we want to make sure that the remaining economic life is above 35 years, makes sense, and we can articulate that to the lender. So value, remaining economic life, adverse influences. So if a property backs onto an industrial plant, traffic, that sort of thing, the lenders will always look at that to make sure that we've considered that properly. If they see a house that's on a very busy street, sold for $1 million, and the same house The subject property is also selling for $1 million, but it's on a quiet street. You know, they want to make sure they can wrap their head around that, so that the appraiser has properly adjusted for those adverse influences.
Yeah.
Conditions a big one too. So we talked about that earlier about keeping your house nice and tidy. If a property is in below average or fair condition, you're going to have an issue with that appraisal. Now, that word below average is very subjective. So from an appraisal standpoint, or from our experience, we just like to tell our appraisers if the house is not livable, you know, if it's not livable, if there's holes in the wall, you can't walk on the floor, the kitchen is basically dismantled, electricity doesn't work, that sort of thing, you're going to have an issue doing a basic residential appraisal. The lender or the broker that you're dealing with might want to turn it into like a development type of appraisal or a land only appraisal, depending on the lender's requirements. And lastly, they're looking for any latent value. So this is, I like to call it development value. So if you're buying a half acre in Abbotsford, or a parcel in Surrey that has future development potential, there's a lot of value in that. And often if we're doing a basic residential appraisal, we can't include that. So it's very important to know, if your property that you are appraising or financing, if there's any latent values such as development value or subdividable value, that sort of thing, we want to definitely consider that, so the lender knows exactly what they're getting into.
That's a really interesting one, Adam. So, because at the end of the day, you need to find 3 to 6 recent comparable sales that are really similar to the home that you're trying to appraise. And if all of the other properties that you're using as comparables also have this latent value, which latent value, by the way, means future projected value. So if all of these properties you're using as comps could be improved and could be knocked down and developed, then I guess all of them would have that sale price built into it, which would support your appraisal value on the property that you're trying to appraise, right? But if some of the comps, you can't find other comps that support that, then you'd probably have a bit of a challenge with that.
Got it.
Interesting. Cool. This is one that comes up a lot. I'm sure you get asked this one a lot too. Best bang for your buck renovations.
Yeah, this is a great question. I like to say that it's whatever renovations that I'd want to do to make my home more enjoyable. I think that's the best bang for your buck. Do you want a new kitchen? Get a new kitchen. Do you want a new bathroom, or you want to turn your bathtub into just a walk-in shower? I feel those are the best renovations to do. But if we're talking about ROI, and you want to flip a property, you want to make a profit, I think it's common sense now among investors, property owners. You want to do the kitchen, the bathrooms, windows are good, flooring, and the trick here is to find a talented, relatively inexpensive tradesperson to max your ROI. And that's difficult, especially with the cost of trades and the cost of materials these days. A kitchen can be around 50 to 100,000 if you want to do a good kitchen. The bathrooms can be 10 to 30,000. We just did our bathroom 25,000. So these they're not cheap anymore. It seems like maybe 10 years ago you could do a bathroom for $5,000, you could do a kitchen for 20 grand, and you can almost double your value. I'm not seeing a lot of areas where you can double your value like you could maybe 10 years ago. But I am seeing things that do not add value. And I think that's another one. Are we going to talk about that, Kyle? Things that the worst bang for your buck.
You got it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a little more fun. And again, there's 2 approaches to this. It's the value if you are to go and sell the property, or a value for an appraisal. So appraiser comes in, we make a lot of assumptions. We assume everything's working perfectly. So electrical, plumbing, drain tile, everything's running well. There's no flooding, there's no issues like that. And so if you're going to spend $100,000 on drain tile, landscaping, put in a pool, electrical, plumbing, this is all stuff that the appraiser can't really see, and therefore they may not integrate that into the appraised value. So those are things that I kind of would stay away from, especially like a pool is not going to give you value in 80% of the markets out there, because pools, 50% of people want the pool, 50% of the buyers feel it's a liability, and just constant upkeep and maintenance. So it does go both ways with pools. Drain tile, roofs, electrical, plumbing, those are the big ones that really don't add appraisal value. However, that being said, a house is an investment and you want to keep it up. So these are not unimportant items, I would definitely, if your drain tile is backing up, you want to correct that. If your roof is starting to crack, look old, or leak, you want to replace all that stuff to keep your investment happy and healthy. But as far as from an appraisal standpoint, those don't add value. So if you're trying to get a maximum appraised value to refinance and go do something else, stick to those key things: kitchen, bathrooms, flooring, and windows.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I had a question for you on the on value again. So talking about things that you can do to your property that won't add value. One thing that comes up a lot is outbuildings. Lenders often don't lend on the value of outbuildings like shops or sheds or things like that. Do you want to maybe comment on that and what your perception of why lenders won't do that?
Sure. Yeah. Every lender has their own list of appraisal requirements, and that's what they want the appraiser to include in that appraisal. So it has to be things that are residentially related. So if you have a shop, it's kind of commercial, doesn't fall into a standard single family residential home, the lender is going to say, no, we don't want to include that. And so what happens is when you buy that property out in Langley that's got, 2 shops, a barn, maybe a secondary dwelling, you might buy the property for 1.8 million, but because we can't include that, you might get 1.6 million on the appraisal. So it's very important that when you're dealing with a mortgage broker or a lender, that you understand what are the lending requirements, because you do not want to come up $200,000 short on an appraisal when you think it's going to come up, without any issues. So secondary dwellings are a big one, shops, barns, those types of things.
Makes sense. And the way I view that is the lenders, in the event of a foreclosure, want the property to be highly marketable at the lending value, right? And so, as you said earlier, if 50% of people want a pool and 50% of people don't, and that might even be high in favor of the pool, then it's the same for a shop. Somebody like me, for instance, I'm great with the calculator, I'm terrible with a hammer. The shop for me has very little value, and it's taking up room in that backyard where I want to have my pool, So I think that the problem is those types of things don't appeal to the vast majority of the marketplace. They appeal to a certain niche of the marketplace, and in those situations, certain buyers may not pay for them, which means the lenders don't want to value them. Cool. On the best bang for your buck, I kind of wanted to circle back to this because this is an interesting one. We're finding the same thing actually in our my fiance and I buy a property out in Victoria. It's a 7-unit place, and we're turning over the units and turning it into an Airbnb. It's actually where I'm at right now. And we're having a really tough time finding contractors too. The price points and just getting people to show up is very, very tricky and difficult. So I'm kind of interested actually. Oh, you're back. Awesome. You figured it out. And one of the things that I find interesting is we have clients that are flipping properties, and they're still being successful in the flips. And so I know that appraisers often look at money in and cost determines what the value is. So if you bought something for 500 grand and you put 50 grand into it, appraisers often will say, well, great, the value is 550, right? Because from an appraiser's perspective, that often makes the most sense. But people are obviously flipping homes and making a profit, because they wouldn't do it if there wasn't a profit there for them to be able to take home. What do you think flippers are doing to be able to do that? Are they just making so much money on the buy because it's not a very marketable property and other people might have difficulty financing, or what is your take on that?
Yeah, great question, Kyle. And I ask people the same question a lot, because there are investors making money out there. And what I get and what I hear regularly is we kept on it. We kept on looking for that deal. Right. I don't have the patience for that. We've bought multiple properties, and, I see a property and I pay market value for it every time. And so I'm not the best real estate investor. And when I ask investors that question, they say, we just kept searching. We kept searching. We had 2 or 3 realtors looking for off-market listings. And, I think it's like anything in life, the more effort you put into it, the better you're going to do. And just if you have the time and the energy to just look, lowball offer, find a good transaction that makes sense for both parties, you're really going to win when it comes to renovating it at hopefully with a good value contractor and then selling it for a profit.
Yeah.
Do you find the same thing? or similar things?
Yeah, I would say that most of our flippers are often buying properties with really competitive terms and not so that way they don't have to compete with price. So they're competing with quick closings, don't need financing on their offers, and so they're able to close with cash, making really clean offers to people that might be a little bit more desperate to sell and sell quickly. And so if you're finding a distressed property, for instance, often the time of closing is really important to those people. And because of banks being super busy and backed up, if you can make a cash offer and you do have the cash or you have a line of credit on your home already that you can use to fund it with cash, you could close reasonably in 1 or 2 weeks. Whereas other people that are getting a mortgage have no way of competing with that and therefore have to just bow out, or those people would have to pay so much more in the price, which means that then their margins get thinner and it doesn't make sense for them to flip it. So I think that a lot of my flippers are competing by just writing really competitive terms on their offers.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the market, I mean, or buy in an upward market, right? If you think you're in an upward market, buy.
Yeah, exactly. Sweet. All right, Adam, I want to play a little game with you. It's called So You Think You're an Appraiser. So I want to hear some. I want to hear some interesting stories that you've heard from people on. Hey, how come my home isn't worth this much? My neighbor's house was listed for 1.5 million. How come my house isn't worth 1.5 million? I want to hear some interesting stories and some things that you've heard from customers. And I'll pitch in a couple of my own because I'm sure that I've heard a few of them too.
How much time do you have?
Yeah, let's say 5 minutes.
So, I mean, yeah, we've heard it all. Like I said, 1,000 appraisals a month, 8 years in business. We've heard it all. Are there any realtors on the call?
Oh yeah, of course.
So, realtors, like appraisers, they're your best friend or your worst enemy sometimes. And so we go into these appraisals being 100% objective. We're the only professionals that are unbiased in the entire transaction. You have realtors that want to sell high, buy low. You want mortgage brokers that, want to get the deal done at any cost. And you have buyers who can often be emotional when they're buying a property. So the appraiser is the only one that is quote unquote unbiased. And we had a property that sold for 1.5 million. It was listed at 1.2, sold at 1.5, and we came in with the appraisal 1.4, 100 grand below the sale price. And we looked at it. My review manager looked at it. He's like, Adam, I don't think there's any room to move here. I looked at it from a few different angles. We were able to increase it 50 grand. To kind of shorten that gap. So we came out, 1.45 with a 1.5 purchase price. So, they're understandably upset. And so I said, you know what, we've searched everything. We're kind of at a loss here. This is the final value. He says, well, can I have my realtor send you a comparable? I said, sure. I'm happy to look at all the data and make a decision. Well, he sent me the most expensive sale in Aldergrove. Of a similar single family home. I think it was like 2.2 million for this house. So ours has to be worth 1.5 because this one sold for 2.2. It's not a comparable. The lot was twice as big. The house was twice as nice. And it just really, it didn't help matters. So everyone's trying to work these deals out, but sometimes there's only so much you can do. And then actually this happened yesterday. Today I was out for lunch with my office manager. We saw the broker there. Broker came over, shook my hand. Hey, Adam, how's it going? And I said, yeah, sorry about that deal. He says, well, don't apologize to me. I'm here meeting the buyers. They're sitting right next to you. So,
no way.
There's a group of 4 of them. I said, well, if you want to buy me a drink, maybe we can figure it out. But no, I'm kidding. I would never do that. But yeah, just little things like that. People are giving us misinformation all the time, and we're trying to suss through all the noise and come up with a fair value. And really, at the end of the day, our career and our livelihood is based on protecting the bank's assets, right? It's providing good service to the broker and trusted values to the lender. With that kind of combo, we're unstoppable. When you start to compromise your ethics and say, hey, Kyle, I'll give you an extra 50 grand here or 100 grand there. If the lender looks at that and sees that Adlaw Appraisals is pushing values, you get cut off the list, right? And that's a huge negative. So that just happened actually yesterday and today. From the homeowners, a lot of the times they will try to determine the value themselves. So they'll say, hey, this is a refinance, house down the street sold for 1.5, house down there sold for 1.6. So ours has got to be worth, in the middle. And if you go back to the office and you look up those sales, they're completely different properties, right? You're in a 40-year-old basement entry home. they're a 10-year-old, 2-story plus basement home with views of the ocean or something. So I think we all have biases, and we see it all the time in appraisal that people think their house might be worth more than it is. I know I'm guilty of that too. And then people think that their house is the best house in the street, because they know it better than anybody else. They've done all the updates themselves. They're really confident in the quality of their home, and any sales that you might provide them that are pretty identical or very comparable, they just say, no, it's not comparable. So there are these hidden biases that we have to consider. Another one is the fee for the appraisal. So oftentimes, we'll call and say, hey, there's an appraiser coming on Tuesday. Does that work? Yes. Okay. The fee for the appraisal is $350 plus GST. They might be happy to pay that. And then the appraiser comes in for 10 minutes. And then we get a phone call. Why are we paying $350 for 10 minutes of work? Little did they know the appraiser drove, 20 minutes to get there, 20 minutes back, and then spend an hour and a half on that appraisal. And above and beyond that, an appraiser is the most educated professional in this industry, besides maybe some other ones. But we have the average appraiser has done 8 years of schooling, right? Wow. So you need a degree, you need to take about 8 or 9 courses, interviews, multiple exams. It's a whole thing. So there's a lot of work that goes into becoming an appraiser, and it's not a sexy job, but we do believe that we are worth the $300 or $400 that it costs to get an appraisal done, especially when it's $1 million asset, right? Or a $500,000 asset. These are big decisions that lenders are making, and we want to make sure that we're doing a good job. If we cut those fees back to $300, $250, you end up attracting poor appraisers, doing poor jobs, and just the credibility of your whole operation goes out the window. So
yeah, that's awesome.
So those are a few things: the values of the properties, the cost of an appraisal, and the biases that we see all the time, that people think their house is better or it's comparable to this, when in fact it's not really. But we will always do our due diligence and try to gather as much information. If you want to give us that list of appraisals or that list of updates, if you want to give us sales from your realtor, we'll happily look at that and see if we can consider it in our evaluation.
Yeah, for sure. That brings up another interesting point, which is that really you're kind of an interesting you're in an interesting position, because you have one person paying for the report, but really the report is for the bank, right? And so it's kind of an interesting spot, because the report is technically for the bank's eyes, not for the borrower's eyes. Maybe you can comment a little bit on that.
I'm glad you brought this up, Kyle, because it's a question that we get every day in the office. Mm-hmm. And so I paid for the appraisal. Why don't I get a copy of the appraisal? That's what it is. And from the Appraisal Institute's standards, we have a client that we're doing work for. The client is the only individual or organization that can see that appraisal. So in this case, Kyle, if you're doing a mortgage for Scotiabank, TD Bank, they're the only ones that can see that appraisal. And it can go through you to the lender, but no one else can actually see that appraisal. And there's lots of liability involved with that too. We might want to say, hey, I know John or I know Susan, I'm just going to give them a copy. If they get that copy of that appraisal and they go do some other financing with it, or they might be going through a separation. They use that appraisal for a separation. Each appraisal has a purpose, which is in this case financing with a client in mind, which in this case is the lender. And that's the only direction that appraisal can go. If the client does want a copy of the appraisal, we can do what's called a revised appraisal, but the client has to actually order it from us directly. That makes them the client, and we can do it for them at a discounted rate. But it does, they won't get a copy of that appraisal that we've completed for financing purposes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it would be a corner case situation, but there's liability. Like if you deliver us a report that was intended for the bank, and then our client or our borrower asked us for a copy of it and we gave it to them, and let's say that 2 years later, the client and their spouse go through a separation, and they decide to use the appraisal to determine the value based on the separation, and then they split. And then a year later, all of a sudden, one of them comes back and says, hey, wait a second, the appraisal report didn't include the value of the shop, which was 50 grand, because the lender didn't include it, right? And all of a sudden, now you have those people fighting, like, well, we used the appraisal report. Yeah, but the appraisal report was inaccurate. All of a sudden goes out to you, and now all of a sudden they're trying to involve you in a lawsuit. you're going to say, Kyle, why'd you give them a copy of the report? Now I'm sucked into a lawsuit.
Mhm.
You know, that like all of a sudden all these people are involved that really shouldn't be. The interesting question really comes down to if it is for the bank, then why does the bank not just pay for it themselves? Really, is what it should come down to, right? If the
Exactly.
report is for the bank, you just have to chalk it up as this is kind of a mortgage fee, right? And the banks generally would prefer for the client, if they're haven't committed fully to the bank yet, they'd probably prefer, hey, client should pay for the appraisal upfront, because what if the client, what if the bank orders an appraisal and the bank says, you know what, your rate wasn't good enough, I went to this lender, right? And all of a sudden they walk and the bank's like, well, I'd pay for a report, now I'm out money, right?
Right. And is it not true, Kyle, that you will shop an appraisal between multiple lenders?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as a broker, we're shopping multiple lenders, throughout the entire transaction. So for us, some of these will have clients that's like, oh, I went to my branch and they paid for the appraisal up front. In the broker world, we're shopping our client's deal all the time, right? If another lender comes up with a better rate, we might say, oh, we're going to take this appraisal, send it over to this lender, and get a quote from them, and work on figuring out how far we can get along with that new bank if the rate's more competitive. So
You got
it
it.
is
Yeah.
kind of an interesting thing. It is one of those weird situations where the borrower is paying for it, but they don't actually get to receive it because they are not considered the client, even though they paid for it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if not to pump your own tires, but I have half of my appraisal or half of my properties with a mortgage broker and half of my appraisals with the bank, and the bank's turnover is so high. I had someone call me up the other day to renew my financing at Scotiabank, and the questions that they were asking were shocking. And I said, "How long have you been doing this?" 6 months.
Oh man.
Right. So banks have that turnover, and I know the broker that we deal with, we've been with them for 10 years, and they'll probably be with them for another 30. So it's definitely the way to go.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Awesome. All right, moving on. So Adam, I do want to. Are you going to be around in the next half an hour or so at the end of the presentation?
I'm not actually, Kyle. I have to run, but are there any
Yeah.
Q&As that I can?
Yeah, let's do some Q&As right now
through?
before Adam has to leave, because I want to make sure that everybody can ask Adam their questions. So there are some questions in the Q&A. Maybe if you just want to take control of these ones, if you want to take a look.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kyle. Simon says, not sure if it was asked already. How can a house be appraised correctly in a drive-by appraisal? I can't even tell if it was actually done via drive-by, since appraisers do not meet on site. And that's just like, it's a limited style appraisal, and the value is going to be based on a limited information, right? So to answer your question, Simon, it might not be accurate, but it will provide a range of value that will hopefully help get the mortgage completed. And sometimes the lender doesn't want an exact value. They just want confirmation or some sort of peace of mind that there is value there. And the drive-by will at least ensure that the house is there, where a desktop appraisal doesn't even confirm that the house is still there. So I hope that answers your question, Simon. Marion Romeda, with regard to renovations mentioned, such as electrical, plumbing, and other that the appraiser cannot see, if the lifespan of the property is in question, will these types of renovations add to the lifespan that the appraiser indicates, assuming you make the appraiser aware of these renovations? Absolutely. So these things, if they're written out on a Word document, piece of paper, whatever, the appraiser will say, hey, this house is very well maintained. And if they have an opportunity to bump the value up, which we always do, knowing that we can increase the value of the property. There's no way to confirm this. Appraisers are not going to knock holes in the drywall. We're not going to ask for receipts from the renovations. We assume that everyone's acting in good faith. So as long as you provide us a list with everything you've done, whether we can see it or not, we will include that in the appraisal. Thanks, Marion. Eric Martin, garden suites are not allowed in most areas of Ontario. Do garden suites add value? At this point in time, yes. So
now allowed.
Do garden suites add value? Garden suites are now allowed in most areas of Ontario. Yeah. So a garden suite is like a basement suite. Is that the same in Vancouver and BC? I would assume so. Absolutely. So there's two ways to approach this. One, a garden suite has a kitchen, bathroom, all those items, those physical improvements that actually add value to a property. And if the market deems these accessory houses, thanks, Eric, garden suites. So if it's residential in nature, most lenders do include garden suites in the value, but it is specific to, and some lenders do not include any sort of outbuildings, secondary dwellings, etc. So it is lender specific.
Mhm. That might be kind of similar to a laneway house then, right?
If it's similar to a laneway house, absolutely, we include that in the value, and that's pretty much across the board with all lenders.
Yeah.
Rod says, can you do appraisals for a past date? What was the value of a home at June 15th, 2010? Absolutely. Yeah, that's called a retrospective appraisal. And we can go back to, the mid 90s. We still have that data available, so we can definitely do that. Thanks, Rod. Dwight says 20K spent to add 200 square feet, $300 a square foot average in a certain town. Is the new appraised value 60K more now? So that's cost versus value. So this is very subjective. So 20K spent on 200 square feet. Was it 20K well spent? How is the finishing? How's the craftsmanship? If it's a solid 200 square feet, then it will add value, but $300 a square foot seems high for additional value. So economies of scale, 1,000 square foot home is going to be worth so much. If you doubled it to 2,000, it's going to be worth, probably double. Every additional square foot adds less to the overall value. So to answer your question, no, it's not a direct A times B situation. We have to reflect what the market is going to pay. So if a market deems that extra 200 square foot is valuable, then we can include it. If the market says, the house is already 5,000 square feet, so an extra 200 is not going to make a difference.
Right. And that depends. Now, all of a sudden, maybe there's more comparables that did sell for a higher price because they had that extra 200 square feet, right? So it might just pump it up a little bit. Yeah. I see two more questions. Oh, there's one from Angela, and then we'll get to a couple in the chat, and then we'll let you go.
Awesome. Angela, regarding a rental income building with potential development, if the building will be demolished as soon as DP is issued, are there any differences in the appraisal? That's a tough one. Regarding a rental income building with potential for development. There would be two approaches to that. One would be the current as is value, where we wouldn't assume any development. So you'd have to compare it to other properties that have no development. And that's 9 times out of 10, that's what a residential value will include. If there is a potential development and the building has been demolished as soon as the DP is issued, you're going to have to look at the highest and best use of that property. So what can they build on that property? Are they going to assemble townhouses, apartments, high rise, multifamily, 2 or 3 lots? That all has to be considered. So we want to make sure that we're comparing it to the highest and best use of that property. So Angela, that's a tough one. If you want to send me an email and get some more detail on that, I'd love to chat about that more. Daniel, I have a 3-bed, 1-bath basement bungalow. What would you appraise higher if I convert the upper unit, 4-bed, 2-bath and reno basement apartment, or convert the house into a legal duplex and separate all the utilities? That is a challenging one. So I would say the more units you can create, the higher the value will be. So if you can convert it to a duplex and separate all the utilities, that's going to be your best bang for your buck. Whether it's a 3-bed, 1-bath, 2-bed, 2-bath, etc., that really gets a little bit complex, and it's market specific too. So something in Abbotsford, it might work really well. Maybe in East Vancouver, it might not be as much demand for that type of layout. So it's very particular to the area in which you're doing it.
Cool. I got 2 that are in the chat, and then we'll let you go, Adam. How is an illegal suite appraised compared to, or in a legal suite compared to a legal suite? Is there any difference in value?
At this time, there's not. So there's so many illegal suites in different areas of the Lower Mainland specifically, and the market doesn't really differentiate. I think a legal suite will make a buyer a little bit more comfortable in purchasing the property, but as it stands, no illegal suites have been decommissioned as far as I know, or at least it's a very low probability of an illegal suite being decommissioned. So as long as it's built to good quality, good standards, you have a house inspection, and there's rental income to that suite, there should be no issues. We do put a note in the appraisal if a suite does not conform to the zoning. Mm-hmm. But most zoning does allow for a secondary suite. So there's been no major issues up to this point regarding that. And that's that's December 1st. This could change because there has been some talk lately about lenders not lending on illegal suites. And that could be a huge, I mean, that could break the market if they did follow through on that. So I don't think they will. Housing affordability is so important. Finding homes for people is so important. If they start taking basement suites out, they're going to get kicked out of office pretty quick, I would think.
I think so too. And I think in Ontario and other provinces, I think it's more common for them to be legal or illegal, whereas in BC, so many are illegal that the lenders all just use them and use the rents and value. There's one more from Alan. So can a rental home with a legal basement suite be valued based on net operating income or only based on bricks and mortar?
Can a rental home with a legal basement suite be valued based on net operating income? So residential appraisals do not include the income approach. So the income it's generating will have no impact on the value. It's basically brick and mortar, like you said. How's the kitchen? How's the how's the flooring? How's the ceiling height? Those types of things do add value. The reason I say that is because a lot of times people will Airbnb their property. They'll do short-term rentals, and that will bump up the income, not necessarily going to bump up the value of the property, because the next buyer coming in probably won't be looking at maximizing the example of that is, for example, a 5-unit multifamily.
You're sending fuzzy there, Adam. I can answer the question there really quickly. So Alan, a residential report is always just based off of the direct comparison approach. So they're just looking at what other properties that are similar to it have sold for. When you're dealing with multifamily, so 5+ units, then the direct comparison approach, but also the income approach is also used to determine the value. And so looking at a single or a dual unit property, they don't value it based off of the income. They just value it based off of the direct comparison approach. And that's because most buyers of those types of properties, like 90 to 95% of buyers buying a 1 to 4 unit property, are buying it for primarily personal use. Or if you're buying a 5+ unit, then that's typically a commercial property. Adam, you're back.
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good again.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that, everyone. Yeah, Kyle, you nailed it. Income is more important in an investment type commercial property than in a residential context.
Yeah, sweet. Well, Adam, thanks so much for joining us. I still have half a presentation because we've talked a lot about what an appraisal is and how you can maximize the value of your home. Then the next part of my presentation, we're talking about how you can finance it and jump into my segment. But thanks so much for joining us and giving us such great valuable information. If people wanted to reach your team, Adam, how can they reach your team?
Yeah, you can call us at 604-809-8506. You can text us as well. Our website, adlawappraisals.com, or email us info@adlawappraisals.com. Thanks a lot, Kyle. You're one of the good ones, and keep up the awesome work.
Thanks, buddy. I know I'm not nearly as educated as you, but we'll just keep that between us. Didn't realize appraisers needed to have 8 years of schooling on average.
It's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy.
If anyone has further questions, just shoot me an email. I'll put it in the chats here.
Yeah, awesome. All right, thanks a lot, Adam.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Awesome. I know there's some other questions here, guys. I will get to Q&A and questions and circle back at the end of the presentation. So don't worry, Charlene, Daniel, I will answer your questions there. Awesome. So we've talked a lot about the renovations and some of the things that you can do to your property. Now let's talk about how you can actually finance it and get into the the numbers part of it. So we talked about what to do, what work to do, and also what not to do. But now we want to discuss how to do it. So there's a couple different routes that you can take to finance your renovations. The first one is just using cash or any unsecured loans you have. So if you have unsecured lines of credit cards, etc. This is the easiest, but it's often the most expensive. And you often have a limited amount of capital available to you in these situations too. You probably don't have the same amount of cash available to you if you're just using your credit cards or line of credit compared to doing a refinance, for instance. You also have a program called Purchase Plus Improvements, which is really cool. And basically what you do is you're getting financing based off of the improved value. These types of mortgages are a little bit harder to get. Don't worry, I have some more information about exactly what Purchase Plus Improvements is in a couple of slides. You can also just refinance before you do the work or refinance after you do the work. This is easier than Purchase Plus Improvements, and because there's a little less paperwork involved that you need to give to the bank to do this. But in one direction or the other, you may either not get quite enough money, or you don't have a guarantee that that you're going to be able to be approved. So if you do the refinance before you do the work, the lender's only lending on today's value. So you may not get enough money to actually finish your project. Or the opposite is doing the refinance after and not being guaranteed that you're actually going to qualify for that mortgage once all the work is done. The last one is construction financing, which is usually only required for larger scale projects. And I'll talk a little bit about why you might want to look into a construction mortgage for financing your renovations, as it is a larger ordeal and it's more expensive. So cash and unsecured loans, and in using this to fund your renovations. Let's talk a little bit about this. It's faster, easier, and in general more expensive if you're using credit cards or whatnot. One thing that I do want to offer a word of caution on is that you need to make sure that if you're planning on using this to do your renovations, that if you're going to be maxing out your credit and then you're going to try to refinance to pay off these debts later on, you need to be very sure that you're not going to damage your credit enough, because now you're bumping up against the maximum borrowing power that you have on all of your credit limits, which would be pulling down your credit score. You might find, and we see this happen all the time, where all of a sudden our borrower's credit score is not good enough to be able to qualify them for A lending. And so now all of a sudden we need to do a private mortgage at a higher interest rate to pay off their credit cards. And the private loan is actually almost as high as the credit card rates are. So we need to do this just because the private mortgage is not going to negatively impact the borrower's credit score, whereas all the credit card debt is. And then once the credit score is improved after a few months, then we can go and roll both their mortgage and the private mortgage that we got for the client into one bundle at a much cheaper cost. So just make sure that you have a game plan here. If you start to really use all of your credit in order to do all your renovations, then you might find that you've backed yourself into a corner unknowingly. Purchase Plus Improvements. I really like this program and product. It's really neat, and there's a lot of little cool things that I want to go into. So overall, it can result in more funding for you. It's the fact that the funding is approved in advance is really key here, and it is the cheapest money that you can get. So the way that Purchase Plus Improvements works is you're actually getting an approval at the time of approval for not just the purchase price, but also for the money that you're putting into the project. And the next slide will actually go into a bit of a example for you to paint a better picture. But the lender's giving you an approval up front for this, so you know that you will receive the money once all the work is done, which is really, really key. It gets rolled into your mortgage, and so you're getting a mortgage rate on this money too, which is a really important key. And what you have to do is, while you're purchasing the home, you have to go and get a third-party quote for the work that you plan on doing on the property. And you take that quote to the bank and they say, okay, we're going to add that on to the purchase price, and that will determine how much financing you're going to get. So I'll show you a quick example here. Actually, the example is next slide. So you need a third-party quote. Once the work is complete, then the bank releases the money to you. They're funding you based off of the improved value. But there is no lift factored in here, which is an important feature. And Adam and I were talking a little bit about this earlier, but in many cases, banks and appraisers only would just use the cost. So if you bought something for 500 and put 50 grand into it, then the lender would use 550 for the value. They won't look at that and say, well, now you've done really nice renos, the place is now worth 600,000 and we'll finance you based off of that number. The banks aren't going to do that. It'll be based just on the cost. One thing that's really cool here is I really like this program for first-time home buyers for two reasons. Number one, effectively, if you're putting 5% down, you're putting 5% down on the total purchase price, which means you're getting 95% financing or 95% leverage. If you're doing Purchase Plus Improvements, instead of just using your own cash to do the renovations, you're financing 95% of the renovations as well, which is really, really cool. One thing to keep in mind is that the lenders only generally like to do purchase plus improvements for about 10% of the total purchase price. So you have to keep that in mind. If you bought something for 500 grand, then 50 grand is probably the maximum. Sometimes the lenders will cap it at 40 even as a cap or limit. But one cool thing about the first-time homebuyer segment that I see, not only on getting leverage on all of these renovations instead of having to use cash, is that if you're right around the first-time homebuyer property transfer tax limit. So in BC, if you buy up to $500,000 and you're a first-time homebuyer, then there's no property transfer tax. If you buy between 500 and 525, you pay a percentage of the tax. If you buy for over 525, you pay the entire tax. Some of our first-time homebuyers are hovering right around that 500 to 525 price range. While that 500 to 525 price range is a difference of not having to pay $8,000 of property tax, property transfer tax, or at 525 having to pay $8,500 of property transfer tax, which is a pretty big bill to be adding. So if you found a property that with 25 grand of renovations would be worth 525, you could buy a place at $500,000 and use this program to upgrade it to the style that you want, and also get the flooring that you guys want and the paint colors that you want, etc. Keep in mind that on purchase plus improvements, the lenders are only lending on the value of concrete things inside the home. So they do not lend on what are called chattels. A chattel is anything that can be removed from the home. So blinds like this could be removed from the home easily, and they will not lend on those. Appliances even can be removed from the home technically, and so they do not lend on the value of appliances. But overall, this program is really, really cool. So if you give you a quick example here, if you bought a home for 500,000 and you're putting 50 grand of renovations into it, the lender would use a value of 550 for financing. And so if you're putting 5% down, it would be based off of the 550 value. If you're putting 20% down, it would again be based on the 550 value. So you'll do the work to the property. So you still have to have available credit to be able to do this, or available cash to do the work. Sometimes we have people that borrow from friends or family, or even arrange with the contractor to pay them later. They'll show them their mortgage approval, showing they have an approval for purchase plus improvements. For anybody who's struggling with this, I do get emails from some contractors that explicitly go to mortgage brokers to say, hey, we understand the program. We will work with your clients who are doing this program, which is kind of interesting. And so some of these clients will negotiate with their contractor. They'll put 10% of the cost up front, and then they'll pay the contractor back once all the work is done. So it's kind of a neat program, and a lot of our clients are using it. So it's a neat program from that perspective, especially for first-time buyers. So on top of that, you can refinance before or after you do the work. A couple of pros and cons when you do this. So let's talk about refinancing before. If you refinance before the work is done, you're refinancing up to 80% of the current market value. And you can take these funds out on either a mortgage or a line of credit. And you don't need any quote. There's no holdback or anything like that, like there is in the purchase plus improvements. It's just a refinance. You're pulling the equity out and you're good. This is good for a situation where you don't need to exceed 80% of the current value of the current property. Or you can refinance after, and you can access the future value, possibly even including any lift. So if you put 50 grand in renos into it, and now the value of the home is increased by $75,000, well, you might be able to access that new higher valuation in that case if you're refinancing after all the renos are done. But it is important to note that many lenders only allow to refinance a property 1 year after you've purchased it. So you can't just buy the home, do the renos, and then necessarily refinance it immediately after. There's some lenders are okay with this. In fact, in many cases, it's easier to show them that, hey, look, some renovations were actually done. Here's the before, here's the after photos, to give the lender a sense that some work was done. Lenders do not like to refinance properties where the values have just increased in the market, and now you're trying to tap into your home and use it like an ATM machine. One downside to this program or doing it this way is that there's no guarantee of approval. So you might try to refinance the property after, and you thought you're going to get approved, and the bank says, oh, actually, our lending policies have changed and now you can't qualify. Or, oh, well, new rule, you have to wait a year before you can refinance. And so there's no guarantee of this. And so some clients do get caught where they put it all on credit expecting that they'll be able to qualify for the refinance, and then they get caught where they can't, and now they're stuck with all that money sitting on expensive credit card debts. And then their credit score starts to drop, and then their likelihood and ability to refinance with an A lender actually decreases over time. So that can be a bit of a challenge. Then there's also construction financing. And so let's talk a little bit about what construction financing is. It's when you have multiple draws. And so in purchase plus improvements, for instance, you just have two draws. You have when you close on the purchase, and then you have once all the renovations are done, all of them. In construction financing, you have multiple draws. So if you have a large amount of improvements you're doing to a property, you might not have enough cash to go through and finish the entire project all the way through. So purchase plus improvements is good for like a $40,000 or $50,000 improvement. When you're making a $200,000 improvement, like it's a lot harder for you to have that much cash available to do all that work and then get one draw once all the work is done. So construction financing may be needed in those cases. The funding is approved in advance, so at least you know that you're going to be able to qualify for it, but it is more expensive. And so construction financing is usually priced at prime plus 1 or prime plus 2 during the construction. And then once you're done the construction, usually you roll into a closed mortgage term after that. And on top of that, if you're in a regular mortgage product right now, you'll likely have to break that mortgage, pay a penalty to get out of that mortgage, and then move into the construction loan and pay a higher rate on that loan. So often people try to avoid construction financing whenever they're doing renovations, if it's possible. Let's go into a little bit about how construction financing works. Your financing is based off of what's called the cost to complete basis, meaning that the lender has approved you for a total financing amount. And as they give you draws, they're always keeping enough money back, the amount of money they've already given you, plus the amount that you're totally approved for. They're holding that money back in their pocket and making sure that if you stopped putting money into the home, that they've held enough money back that they could then finish the project. So they're holding back the cost to complete the project. And the funds are released in draws to you. It's important to note that in all of these programs, including purchase plus improvements, you have to put the value into the property, and then the lender's reimbursing you for the work. They're not giving you the money, crossing their fingers and hoping that you don't go to Vegas with it. So they're always monitoring to make sure that you can prove that you actually put the money into the home. And once the construction is done, they'll roll this mortgage into a closed term with the bank. Most of the banks will go up to 75 or maybe max 80% loan to cost. You heard Adam and I earlier talking about loan to value. Loan to cost is different. It's not the value, it's the cost of the land plus the construction costs. And so that is a bit different than a standard loan to value that is usually used on a regular home or regular residential financing. So when would you use construction financing? Usually for a larger scope project, when you're doing large structural changes, you're ripping a property down to the studs. So if a lender shows up and gets an appraisal done and the home is ripped down to the studs, they're probably going to say, yeah, this isn't just we're not going to give you money on a refinance to refinance this home. You need to go and get into a construction mortgage to do this. The lenders don't factor in a lift in this. They're only looking at the cost, which is very important. And on top of that, construction financing is very capital intensive. So you need to remember that it is going to require a lot more capital for you to do that. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, and this is an interesting observation. I've seen a few of my clients do this, well, but quite a few, is getting more out of their house. And so I want to paint a bit of a picture for you. Every $100,000 in your mortgage costs you about $400 a month. And so we have clients that are either looking at buying a new home for themselves or even just looking at how they might be able to change their existing home and put themselves in a better financial picture. If you borrowed $100,000 and you're able to put a suite into your home, you might be able to now get $1,200 a month, let's say, or at least $800 a month. But I think rents have gone up. And I think in many cases, a larger 1-bedroom or a small 2-bedroom could easily get $1,200 a month rent in most areas now. So if you borrowed $100,000 and put a basement suite in your home, now you'd be paying $400 a month, but you're getting $1,200 back per month. And in addition to that, out of that $400 a month in your mortgage, probably only half is interest and half is principal. So you're getting $1,200 And then you're putting 200 grand or $200 per month in the bank, so to speak, down and paying down your principal. And the other $200 a month is going towards the interest. And so you're really net ahead $1,000 a month just by installing a basement suite. It doesn't always cost 100 grand, but this is an easy picture to paint. The same thing applies also if you're looking at buying a new property. If you buy something that has a basement suite in it, in general, the reason that the homes with basement suites are so sought after right now is because it is just more affordable for people. Their net cost of ownership is lower when you have a suite in a home. And so this is something I see a lot of our clients doing right now. Yeah, that really was one of the main points that I wanted to hammer home. We've talked about appraisals and what work to do on a home. We've talked about different ways of funding the projects. And so, Green Mortgage Team is here to help you reno your dream home. There's lots of different ways of obtaining the funding to do that. On our website, you can learn a lot more. There's a for anybody that is doing construction, there's a cost to complete spreadsheet there. For those of you that are investors, some of you are flippers, there's an investor survival guide that has a lot of tips and tricks in there. And then upcoming webinars too. We're just doing our 2022 schedule, and we will still be sticking to the same schedule, which is the first Wednesday of every month at 7 p.m. So stay tuned for those. And those are always coming out. If you do want to learn more about what you can do with your home, you can book a consult with us today. Go to our website. And on top of that, anybody that hasn't read my book, Rockstar Real Estate Investing, feel free to send us an email at info@greenmortgageteam.ca, and we will send a copy of my book to you in the mail. It's good for giving investors, especially newer investors, fundamental information on real estate investing. Now is a great time too. Christmas time is coming up. Those of you that might already have your own copy, if you'd like us to send you a copy to give to somebody, a loved one, family, friend, etc., for Christmas, just send us a note and we're happy to put one in the mail for you. If you have any questions, our office is downtown Vancouver, and this is our contact information. So what I'll do is I'll answer some of the Q&A and chat, because I'm sure there's some questions. That does wrap up the meat of the presentation today. Usually we hang around and talk for at least another half hour, and there's usually lots of questions that come up. So I'll start answering the Q&A now and go through there. Charlene has a question. So can you do a rental market appraisal on a new suite? Also, how do you recommend an appraisal prior, or also do you recommend an appraisal prior to renting out a home for income tax proof of value? So there's two questions here. So first of all, Charlene, an appraiser will do market rents on a new suite. And so some lenders will require you to have a lease in place in order to use the rental income from a basement suite, but many lenders will just use the market rents analysis to determine that. And so many lenders are fairly flexible on being able to use the market rents. On the other side, on the tax side of things, this is an important distinction and question. So in Canada, capital gains is something that you do have to pay if you are selling a rental property, for instance. So any appreciation that occurs on a rental property while it was a rental is subject to capital gains. However, there is no capital gains tax on a personal residence. And so it's very important that if you're switching uses, if you go and you say, okay, my primary residence is now going to become a rental property, then you want to make sure that you have your home appraised at the current value today for as much as possible, because then any appreciation from that high point onwards, looking into the future, is subject to capital gains. Now, some clients say, well, I'll just use the BC assessment value. But guess what? If Adam did an appraisal for you, it might be 900,000, but the BC assessment might only say it's 700,000. If you don't get a full appraisal on your home when you transition and convert the use of that property, then you might be stuck using a much lower valuation for income tax purposes. And so you do need to make sure that you consider the fact that if you're changing the use, any capital gains or any gains on the property while it was owner occupied is not subject to capital gains. But when you switch uses, then that does trigger. Daniel has a question. With such a hot market, how often should we get a property appraised if we're thinking of selling? That's a good question. I mean, I think the tough part right now, Daniel, is that the market is is hot, but at the same time too, there's not a lot of sales happening. And so there's a lot of buyers chasing a very few number of properties. And so my perspective on this is that an appraisal probably won't be changing a lot very quickly, because there's actually not a lot of new sales data to support a different valuation. And so if you saw that a lot of demand and a lot of supply was happening at the same time, a lot of properties would be churning, then there's a lot of new data to throw into a report. But if you have only, a couple of properties per month selling, which I have a feeling will be the trend that we find going into the winter here, you might find that the property values might not be changing a whole lot. That being said, when we bought the 7-unit building in Victoria, we had them appraised back in May of this year, and we just recently had them reappraised in September for financing reasons, and the values had gone up by $200,000 in total for the 7 units. So the values can change fairly quickly, and so because we're trying to obtain the maximum amount of financing possible, a new higher valuation for us now allows us to go back and access more of the equity. Angela has a question. If you buy a rental property and after a few years you make it your primary residence, how does the capital gains work? So that would be going the opposite direction, Angelo. So then you'd want to get an appraisal based off of the amount of the value, how much the value has increased while it was a rental, because now that you're moving into it, any appreciation that occurs from that point onwards while you're living in it would not be subject to capital gains. So in that case, you probably want a low appraisal, because then hopefully the amount of the appreciation while as a rental was low, and any appreciation that occurs while you're living in it would be not subject to capital gains. And I'll go to the chat now too, because I think there was a couple of potential questions in there. Let's see here. And for those of you that are asking for the book, just make sure you send an email to info@greenmortgageteam.ca, and make sure you send us your mailing address too, because otherwise we won't have an address to send it over. So Robert has a question that what if I plan to rent my primary residence every winter? Do I need an appraisal every year? Good question. I would have to ask, I would divert that to an accountant. I'm not a tax expert, but my understanding is that you're probably still calling that your primary residence because it's where you live most of the time. So I expect that you would still continue to maintain that as your primary residence, which means you would not need to get it reappraised every single year, just for that small little window where you're renting it out during the winter. That'd be my take on that. Awesome. I think I've answered all the questions. Does anybody else have any other questions before we jump off here? I think that's it. Okay, guys. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Have a wonderful holiday season. I can't wait to see you guys again in January, on January 5th. Looking forward to seeing a number of you again. And as soon as we have the topics, we'll lay it out for you guys and send you guys some information. So happy holidays to everybody, and have a great time. Thanks. Bye.